Okay, so let's start. This is, I don't know how to define this. It's in between a case study and some ideas you may apply in your job if you happen to become a head of architecture. So in my case, this is the first time I was put in that role. So I come, well, a bit of background. I'm a consultant. Well, I was a consultant from 2016 to 2021, I went permanent. Then I became freelance again. And the ones among you that are contractors or consultants, they know that we make shit up all the time. So we look like experts. We provide consulting. We give lots of advice. I mean, the making shit up is a joke, by the way. We know some things. But the thing is, I was used to give advice to people in this kind of role, maybe even CTO level, things like this. And it's kind of the easy part. When you are in the role itself, everything changes, yeah? So after giving advice to people for quite some time, I stepped into this role where I had basically some kind of operational duties. And I found myself in a situation where I was, yeah, great, I'm the head of architecture, and I have no idea what to do now. Yeah. And so I want to share this experience to see what I did, what worked, and maybe some of the difficulties in between. Yeah. Any questions, any comments, even comments or disagreements, let's have a conversation. Yeah, if you have a similar experience but with different results or a different experience, is fine, okay? So, summary, this will be simple. You know, the role of the architect. This is a refresher because I think there are still differences in the way we perceive what an architect is supposed to do, yeah, in many organizations. And the role of the head of architecture, because he's an architect but has a slightly different role. And also shaping this role. So in this particular case, the role was just created in the company. So I was a consultant there, and I was put there in an interim position, so until they hired the permanent person. So I had to somehow to shape the role according to the needs of the company. Yeah. In any case, even if it is a role in which you are, well, let's say promoted to in your company, I don't really like this because it seems that these architects are there to dictate to others, but it's not quite like this. But if you end up in that role yourself, and if it is already established, actually you may want to shape it according to what you think are the best things to do. Yeah? You just don't want to do whatever people before you did. Well, you may want to do that, may not. Okay? And so the title comes from this book, so unfortunately I wasn't clever enough to invent it myself, which I actually got it when I was in a previous role, interim head of engineering, that was, again, same thing. I was put there and I wasn't quite sure about how to step into the role. I come across this, I can't remember even how I came across this, maybe Googling things, but it's very useful to. So they say this is for leaders, CEOs, CTOs, but actually it's any leadership position. So gives you hints and tips on what to look for, yeah, and how to act. So how to get a context, how to talk to people, how to get information so you can actually understand what you need to do in your new role. Yeah, hints also on how to navigate the politics in your company. By the way, in this kind of roles, from head of architecture, politics is basically your day job, yeah? Not many lines and boxes, but lots of conversations. Okay, so, and I put the title because I really recommend this one. And I'll give also some examples of how I used it. So, let's start with the architect's job. So, can somebody tell me one thing that an architect does? Alan?
Waste space.
Say it again? Waste space. I know that we worked together in the past and you think that of me, but this is not a general rule. But this is what happens it's reality. In some companies, this is what happens, but this is not what I meant, okay? So the first thing is, should architect products? Okay, so think in terms of products, not projects. Okay, so it's not usually in companies, nowadays. I work with the companies that have services, yeah, that run for a long time. So it's not, a project is something that has a start, a middle, and an end. Yeah, if you for a project, could be maybe part of the work you do for a product for a limited period of time. Yeah, could be implementing a complex feature in itself, maybe the first version, because then things will change. That could be a project. But here you have to think in terms of the system as something that will gonna stay around for quite some time. So as a product that will have a long life, yeah? Which is the first thing. The second one is focus on quality attributes. This should be obvious, but it isn't. People always focus on functionality and features and stuff. Quality attributes are the things that actually determine the shape of your system, yeah, more than functionality. Yeah, you can implement Google Docs using a monolith behind the scenes, some servers, or you can have 500 services doing exactly the same thing. There will be a slight difference in various measures of performance and latency and everything else. Yeah. Delay design decisions. Now, as you can imagine from that, I'm not really a big fan of big upfront design. In fact, I think it's wrong, and you should even think about that. And so this is delay design decisions, not in an arbitrary way. It's more kind of try to take those decisions when you have sufficient information to know that that you have to take them and they are useful. Yeah? Or in other terms, if you are thinking about your product, and of course all of you are very good and some of them might have the grand vision, we need to do this in this way because we want the product to be reusable and flexible in that way. Yeah? Now, the thing I suggest is you stop, sit down, maybe get a coffee or a tea, whatever you prefer, take your dictionary and remove the words reusable and flexible from the dictionary and never mention them again. Think about what you need to do now, yeah? Keep the system simple, and maybe things that you know you are certain they are coming, because this may happen. It may happen that you know that in 1-2 months' time you need some functionality, but no more than that, yeah? Because as the most experienced of you probably know already that when you make the system flexible, when the time comes, the bastard flex exactly in the wrong direction. And now you have a load of stuff to take care of, plus the changes for the new functionality, yeah? Architect for change. Yeah? So this is important, and we'll see this later, some implications. You cannot think of designing a system like this is the system, or the lines, boxes, and services, whatever, go implement it, you are done. Yeah? If it is successful, things will change, new functionality, changes to existing functionality, new ideas, maybe changes of direction. Yeah? And so the system will change in shape, even significantly. So architect for change here means actually focusing on qualities that are going to be important all the time. Yeah? And also focusing on constraints you put around that so that change will not arbitrary. You always know what people are doing. Yeah? Things like, we have a service-based architecture. Okay, what is the right way to create a new service in this particular system? What are the constraints? What are the technologies? What are all the various things that must be true at all times? Yeah? Everything else, the teams can do whatever they like. Yeah? Architect for build, test, and deploy. Buildability, testability, and deployability these are not even negotiable anymore. They are must. Yeah? If the system will change during its lifetime, the best way to implement change and knowing that you are not breaking anything is to have appropriate testing, automated testing around. Yeah? Manual testing only when it is strictly necessary for very specific reasons. For the systems I work with, manual testing is about usability, is about accessibility. Sometimes there is some penetration testing done by experts or exploratory testing. Any testing that is a human, that is basically, you are using human instead of a programming language to follow a script, that's wrong. Yeah? And then, of course, build and deploy. It has to be easy to do that. Besides, if it was not easy to deploy and to build, it's probably also difficult to test. Yeah? And then, this is a difficult one. So sometimes you have to model the system to match the organization. But in general, model the organization to match the system. So you want a system to a certain shape, Conway's law. You probably want to match the organization accordingly. In practice, in many companies, this is a very sticky point. Yeah? Anytime you touch team structures and stuff like this, there are all sorts of political battles. So you may end up in a compromise situation where you have a shape that is not exactly what you want, but it's super important that the organization and the shape of the system match, because otherwise you'll have all sorts of problems. Yeah, in terms of ownership, team collaboration, who needs to implement this functionality? Well, I don't know, it's not my responsibility, it's Alan's team. What do you mean, it's my team? It's not the case, you know, this thing has been done by somebody else because you don't have clear boundaries. Yeah? Okay? Are there, do you think there are any things that I missed here, or things that I also said, something that is utterly wrong, that you disagree with so far? Okay. And then, so, the role of the architect, yeah? So, apart from wasting space, if they don't want to be just a waste of space, they have to do something else. They are expected to know the technology and the technologies and the platform on which the organization run, as well as the business they serve. So one thing that architects must know is what is the business? What is the purpose of the business? What the customers are supposed to do with the system? Basically understand the domain well, yeah? Because they are also in between the technical people and the more business ones and the customer. They have to translate human needs in something that runs in a system, yeah? And architects work for and with the teams. So an architect that stays in his or her own office without talking to people and just throwing off the wall designs and stuff like this is a waste of space and also of money. Yeah. An architect that actually if they know their stuff and they work with the team and help them understand some things around, I don't know, why it is important to have these particular communication protocols. Why are we doing things this way? How to connect things together. Basically, in a role of a coach and mentor, and also, you know, working with them, maybe mobbing, pairing with them. That is much more useful. Yeah, it's someone that has a broader perspective on the system and is able to bring this to the teams to help them understand their place in the wide system and do a better job. Yeah, if they don't do this, I agree with Alan. Is a waste of space, yeah? Which is unfortunately the case in many organizations. Now, the head of architecture. The head of architecture is an architect, but as it happens, has some other things to do, because head of architecture usually talks a bit more with more senior people, yeah? You know, CEO, CTO. In terms of duties, depending on the size of the company, the head of architecture could be the CTO. In a startup, typically is a CTO. In bigger companies like this one is not. You know, when you have many departments, CTO has other things to think about, and then there has to be someone with a bit, you know, if you like, a bit more operative capability, yeah? Even if it's not writing code. So it's a kind of an intermediary. Again, know the business inside and out, know the tech. Responsible for architecture governance and technology strategy. I'll explain in a bit what this means. Yeah, technology strategy is quite an interesting one now, especially in startups. They talk a lot about this, but you find very little around about, you know, what the hell is this thing? And coordinate and support the architects to make sure that everybody's on the same page. Yeah. In some situations, like my situation, it was also a role of mentoring the architects themselves and working with the teams when possible. Basically, I always try to use any excuse I have to try to touch some code, at least look at it. But these are the main things that you may end up doing. Yeah. Now, let's have a look at the technology strategy and governance, because these are, well, important for the company, but also are important when you shape the role of the architect. So the technology strategy is how you leverage technology to support your business goals. This definition is taken from the Container Solutions blog. That is the most sane definition I found out there. But it's about what technologies are we going to use, why, yeah? Now, why I look at I remember the keynote with the why, but the why is important there because you might have seen that technical people, we are really suckers for novelty. And so we say, we want to use this. Why? Well, I don't know, but really, yeah. And these choices need to align to the business goals as well. Yeah, these technological choices is not simply what kind of systems you can create and the needs you have. Yeah, so if you need to be close to the metal because you go do algorithmic trading, probably you want to have something like, I don't know, C, C++, Rust, and these kind of languages. Something else, maybe you may want to have Java, JVM, or Python, but it's important that technology choice is made consciously because it's not simply about solving the problem. It has also impacts on, can you hire people that actually know these technologies well? This is a serious thing, yeah? When we are in a team writing our own code, we don't think in these terms. When you are at a level of say, okay, I need to manage the company now, and we don't find people because we are using this obscure language that nobody uses, that is a serious concern, yeah? So they shape that, but then is also what nowadays for many service companies is also cloud systems. Which one are we going to use? AWS, Azure, Google, something in-house? Yeah, there are implications, yeah? But it's also about team and system structure. It's about pipelines, testing. You know, how are we going to actually, what are the rules around how we build the system? The general ones, not super detailed, yeah? Things that when you structure a new team, you say, okay, guys, this is the law, yeah? To do your job, these are things that are expected, yeah? And these things are important both to manage the company, but for startups are important also for investors that need to understand if you've got a grip on what you're actually doing. Yeah? Because if you have a grip, they say, there you go, 500 million pounds. Otherwise, they say, goodbye. Yeah? Okay? And also things around short, medium, and long term. So, because you may have different architectural choices in the short, medium, long term. We are a company with a legacy system. They have typical situation like this one where I was there. They say, we have a monolith, horrible monolith. Monoliths are horrible. We want to go to a service-based architecture. Fine. We cannot stop the business. Yeah? So we want to go in that direction. So now we are in this situation. We want to be there. How do we go from here to there with some milestones, still managing to deliver the functionality the business needs, yeah, but changing the shape of the system as we go in a more suitable way? Yeah? So also this is super important. Simply deciding to go from monolith to microservices and say we shall make it happen just doesn't really work. You really need to think. And having the strategy is an opportunity to actually sit down and think a bit more deeply about what you are going to do and why and how you are going to do that. Yeah? So the other aspect about the strategy, that the strategy may change during time. So you come up now with the say, okay, this is what we plan to do. In 2 months' time, say, something has changed in the market. We need to change the strategy. That is perfectly fine. The most important thing is not that the thing is cast in stone. It's that whatever you do is intentional, and at any point in time, you know in which direction you're going. That is the important thing. And that everybody knows that as well. Yeah? So things may change, but the change has to be intentional and understood. And then let's talk about the governance. Governance and strategy go together. The governance here, I took the definition from this book, which I actually really strongly suggest, from Gregor Hope. It describes the act of harmonizing and standardizing things across the organization by means of rules, guidelines, and standards. So you have a strategy, and now is how are you going to check that the strategy is actually applied correctly? And also, who is going to take what decisions? Yeah? How are you going to take the decisions? The decision process itself. An example, in a wholesale organization, you have to change something, change request, and then there is the change request board, which is typically senior managers that have no idea about the code, and talk there about these things as if they knew something, then they approve it, and then you go. So that is governance. I mean, it's not particularly useful done in that way, but it's a governance process. Yeah, it is about making sure that the rules you created are followed correctly. Yeah. And also that governance is an interesting thing because it has to be done carefully. So if you have rules that are too strict, yeah, if you try to over-constrain the system, yeah, people will work around it, will find their own things. Gregor Hope called that, they will create a black market of things. Yeah. So for example, if one of your rules is, say, we want encryption, data at rest has to be encrypted at all times. This is important, yeah? A data breach, you hope that all they get is the encrypted data, no keys, and say, okay, we are safe, yeah? But how do you make sure that this kind of rule is actually applied consistently? What you can do is actually create a system where it's easy to get that. So to avoid the black market, you have to make the application and enforcement of rules easy. Yeah, remove friction. So things like database encryption, you are using AWS, easy. They say there is a service, I want a database with encryption at rest. Maybe they use Terraform and you have the appropriate configuration that the team just takes, put in their own scripts, and they get a database encrypted at rest without doing much work. Yeah? So if you have a system like this, applying the rules is much easier. If you want encryption of service communications, for internal communications, which in many situations are HTTP instead of HTTPS because HTTPS is a pain to manage, you know, with the certificates, expiry, automatic changes. Well, put some automation in place that is easy to use to allow you all these, all the painful aspects to be taken care of without too much effort. Yeah. Otherwise, if you try to over-constrain the system, there will be a black market, you'll end up in a bit of a messy situation. Yeah. Other rules that are sometimes forgotten, that are super important, but often forgotten, are rules around licensing. So developers, if they don't know what is allowed and what is not, they will get any open source library they think will fit their problem into your system. And then maybe they get a GPL one, and you have some IP rights on your source code, but then because of your business model, you may have to publish your source code out there simply to respect GPL. That is a problem, yeah? So if there are issues around that, even around licenses, they have to be known and understood by everybody. Now, the license is important because I see many companies don't simply look into that until somebody tells them, look, you've used this library, now you've got a problem. Yeah, and the lawyers get involved. That is not a nice situation. Yeah. So governance and strategy basically work together. So the strategy is about how you are, all the rules on how you create the system, yeah, what all your constraints and how you want to do with that. The governance is about how you make those things happen in a way that is controlled, yeah. And of course, they are not at a single level. Especially in big corporations, big companies have different levels. You know, there's company level, department, division. In my case, for example, it was a kind of department level here. Yeah, so, and generally what happens is the lower you go in the level, the more details you have. Yeah, team level, if they are creating services, they may have rules like, for any service, this is the service template we must use to create a new one, and these are the kind of things we always do. Yeah, that is a kind of strategy and governance from a team perspective. From a higher level, they tend to be much more general, yeah? Okay? So, and an important thing is that if you have different levels, that the rules don't contradict each other. And the good way to do that is that any department rules or strategy and governance have to match what the company level is, and so on and so forth. So the lower level is kind of adding detail to the upper level without contradicting it. Yeah? And we'll see also later an example, a simplified example, one thing, but I'll say this now. You don't need to have complication for strategy or governance. You don't need the Encyclopedia Britannica to describe all of this. Yeah, depending on your situation, an A4 page for the strategy or for the governance could be sufficient. This is just to avoid the situation then, because when we talk rules and things and strategy and governance, people often expect big books with plenty of things like law books, yeah? But you don't need that. So now let's see what I did to try to shape this role in my case, yeah? So as I said before, the company didn't have one, was the first one, and I was shaping the role for the person who was coming next, the permanent employee. Of course, shaping in the way that I thought made sense. What I would expect is that the other person maybe uses that as a starting point and maybe improve it in some ways, yeah, or change it at least. So the core duties said intermediary between business and technology, sure. Responsible for architecture, governance, and strategies, this we said us, and coordinates and support the architect. So this is just to remember that. So we need to achieve this. Now, there are some things that we need to have in order to succeed. You have to have credibility. You really need to know your stuff inside and out. If you want people to listen to what you say as a head of architecture, you better know your stuff. Credibility, this means not simply with the developers, but also with the business. So you need to know, to understand the business, to understand the priorities, to understand the concerns, and you need to understand the technical side. I mean, not at the level of reading the code and knowing what happens in some files, but at the level of you can talk, if you do C++ in your company, you can talk C++ with your developers without any problems and look at the code together, yeah? Because if you don't have credibility, you are already failing. Remember that in this role, you are far away from where the real work happens, and if developers don't care about what you say, they can do pretty much whatever they like, yeah? This is just a fact, okay? Integrity. So people need to be able to trust you, yeah? So you do what you say and say what you do with everybody. This is hard, yeah? Because also you want to avoid gossip, which can be hard work, especially for people like me who love gossip. You need to avoid bad-mouthing people, but also you'll be under heavy pressure. So if it happens that somebody irritates you, something that I do is I generally have some people that I really trust, not necessarily in an organization, that act for me like, a dummy I talk to. So I talk to them and say, this, blah, blah, blah. I just let everything out, then I come again, I can go back. But avoid bad-mouthing people in your company, avoid that. Yeah, so if you're under a stressful situation, maybe talk with somebody else. Preferably not in the company, even if it is your friend, because they can say things inadvertently, yeah? Then you have to have the ability to prioritize work. Your own work, but also help other people prioritize their own work. There will be always a lot to do, yeah? And everything everywhere, all at the same time approach never works well. Yeah, so you really need to prioritize your own workload, delegating when possible, yeah, and help others prioritize. Delegation, if you've never done that, is hard because you have to trust people to solve problems, and they will do that, but they most likely will do that in a way that is different from what you would have done. So you need to learn to accept solutions proposed by others, okay? Again, for me at the beginning, I'm old enough that the beginning was a bit back in time, was really hard. Because I was one of those very enthusiastic people that thought they knew a lot of stuff, and was really difficult if I had an idea in my head to actually accept somebody else's. I've learned that. But still, sometimes nowadays, I think, I would have done differently. I don't say anything. It works. Step back is fine. You need to accept that people may make mistakes. Actually, you want to put them in situations where they can push themselves a little bit and make mistakes. You want to avoid blunders. So as in, if they make this mistake, okay, we can just go home because there is no business anymore. you may want to avoid that. So in those situations, you may want to put some safeguards. Yeah? Part of your role when you lead a team is also to make sure that they grow up in skills, yeah, and professionally. And to do that, they need to make mistakes. Yeah? So integrity is super important for all these aspects. And ability to prioritize, of course, was an ability to prioritize as well, because you decide what to do, who is going to do what, and help others do the same. Yeah. Company politics. Now, often when you talk to technical people about politics, they go, I hate politics. I prefer to write code. I just don't like politics. The funny thing is that each of us in our interactions somehow play some kind of political games, like it or not. It's about human interactions. It's about needs, yeah, and goals that you want to achieve, things that you want to achieve, that you want to do, aspirations. It's about this. So politics is not necessarily the scheming kind of thing. You know, it's not like Blackadder kind of scheming, strange stuff. It's more about trying to satisfy some needs you may have. And in this kind of role, it actually becomes a big part of your job. When you talk with also senior people, more senior than you need to understand what they need on a personal level, what they are trying to achieve there, and try to align things together. The same goes when you talk with a team. You know, when people talk about motivation, you know, the self-motivation is great for productivity and stuff like this. To achieve that, you also play some, if you like, political games, innocent ones. Is you kind of try to find with the people involved a perspective on the job that will actually help them align the needs of the company with their own personal needs. Yeah? So the alignment will never be perfect, but has to be good enough so people will be willing to help you out and to do the job. And this is hard. Again, I mean, I don't think that anything I'm saying here is particularly simple at all. Yeah? Of course, you have also your own needs. So you, in the politics, may enter those as well, which is fine, but what you must avoid is to put those in front of everything else, because people will see that. Yeah. Negotiate and compromise. Whatever you want to do, you will not achieve it 100%. That's it. You cannot fight the fight thinking that you are going to win and you are going to have exactly what you want, especially in big companies, but also in small startups. It's not going to happen. Yeah? And in fact, the approach that I prefer is not to look for the perfect technical solution, is looking for an adequate solution that is actually viable for the people involved. That is much better than the perfect technical one, because the perfect technical one, if it is not viable for other people, it's not going to happen. You need buy-in. Yeah? People need to believe in what they need to do. Yeah? Even for now, I'm working with a client to help them with their technology strategy, and this is exactly what we're doing. We are actually talking to everybody involved, including marketing and other parts of the business, because everything has to be aligned to, we need to understand their needs and put them together. And the idea is not to have this is the perfect system. It's like this is a system that will do the job well for us. It's not the perfect one we would like, possibly, on the technical side, but will be the best one in this particular context because satisfies most needs of the people involved. Yeah. So nothing to do with specific technical details, everything to do with people preferences and other aspects, and sometimes also architectural compromise simply because you cannot satisfy all the requirements 100% all the time. Yeah. And then this one, patience. Which a learned skill. I can tell you that because up until I was 25, I was famous among friends for becoming, because I was really irritable when I saw something stupid. I would go, ah! My brother asking me help for mathematics, I would go, ah! If he didn't understand, no patience, you know, like. You have to be patient. Sometimes people will say things that irritate you, or will do things in a way that you think is wrong. You have to stop yourself from assaulting them. And the next thing you need to do is, after you calm down, is actually ask questions. I've discovered that very often when I get really upset and then I start asking questions, I think, oh, I was actually wrong. I missed part of the context. So you really need to understand the other point of view. But it's important that you're able to catch yourself before you do something silly. Yeah. So none of these skills has anything particular to do with maybe the credibility, but with your technical prowess. It's mostly the ability to actually to talk to people and understand things and somehow facilitate an agreement. Yeah. So I said before that I would give you some examples also from the book that I use. So things now, the first thing you do when you get started, you need to understand the expectations and the context. I'm in this new role. What do people think I should be doing? So it's not only about you saying, I'm in this new role, this is what I do. It's more is about what do others think I should be doing? Because everybody has an opinion, yeah? And they can actually provide you good ideas on how you can help them. Yeah? And then, of course, you need to understand the context in which you are. So to do that, you talk to all stakeholders to get a perspective. Stakeholders, in my language, is not simply your customers or clients. Stakeholders, I mean everybody that has an interest in a system. It means you talk with the developers, you talk with the CTO, you talk with the developers, you talk with the managers. Yeah? In fact, talking with developers is pays off quite quickly, because when you talk with them and you listen to them and you address their concerns and you are serious about that, the payback can be really huge, because they will listen to you and will actually ask for your opinion. This gives you real power without doing anything dodgy. Yeah? Review the system, as in, if you have already a system in place, as in code, things you deploy, have a look at that. Open the files, try to get a feel of what you get. Yeah? How good is this? Is it horrible like many people say, or maybe it's acceptable, it's just they are upset about something? Yeah? Get a feel about the system, because you'll be talking about that. You really need to understand what you've got. And in my experience also, looking at the code, you can spot patterns, yeah, among your technical teams. You can spot also a potential lack of skills in some aspects. A typical one is teams that nowadays somehow hate the database so much that they refuse to understand it, and so write, instead of SQL, they write Java with horrible frameworks and stuff, and then forget to put database indexes, and everything is a mess. But if you look at the code, you can get these, so you can get a feel also of, maybe I need to look into these directions to help people out and improve the situation. Yeah. Understand the tools and processes in use. Now, the worst thing you can do is get into a place in your role and say, whatever you are doing is wrong, we'll do things this way. Yeah? If people throw you out of the window with a kick in your bum, at that point, they are doing the right thing. Because when you go, even when people complain all the time, if the company is in business and is making money, they are doing something right. Yeah? And some of the tools and the processes may be just what you need anyway. Also remember that changing tools and processes, if they are adequate, is probably fine if you keep them. Because changing those things can have a lot of friction. You know, change of habits, change of procedures and stuff that can cause a lot of friction in the company. Yeah, slowdowns and malcontent. Yeah, so you have to be careful. Never go in a place thinking that you are the savior of the place and say, okay, now we'll use my tools. In this particular company, a guy came in that was a program manager for part of a system to do some work, and he came, from now on, I won't use, I think, a tool, I can't remember if it was Monday.com or something, to schedule meeting or organize stuff that was not in use by any of us. We were using other stuff to do exactly the same things. Everybody basically refused without saying no, just ignoring the request. Yeah, because I was like, what's the point? We don't see the point. So if you do that, the risk is that you'll become irrelevant very quickly. Yeah, and will not solve any problems. Some things that are really useful, these questions from this book were really fantastic. So I used them in the previous role, was in the same company. So when I started this head of architecture, I already knew things. But when I started the other role, the head of engineering, I used actually these questions, and where with all the people, I actually asked exactly the same questions to all the people I talked to. Managers, developers, engineering managers, product owners, everybody. So things like, what are the 5 most important things we should be sure to preserve and why? What are we doing right? Tell me 5, no more. Yeah, the 5 most important ones. And it's fascinating how people that are actually tell you lots of bad things, they stop and think and say, well, actually, there are these things that are going well. Good, that is good information. Yeah. What are the top 3 things we need to change and why? So you hate lots of these systems. What are the top 3 that you hate the most? And why do you hate them? Give me a reason. Why should we consider them? Yeah. What do you most hope I do? Yeah. This is, what are your expectations for my role? How can I help you out? Yeah. Or what are you most concerned I might do? Are there things that you think I will be doing that actually worry you? Yeah. What advice do you have for me? This is fabulous, especially when you ask that to junior, because you ask them, what advice you have for me? It's like, I'm a junior, I have no idea. Well, there must be something. Yeah. And then anything else you would like to discuss or ask me. I did this in every call I had. So when I had the head of engineering role where I used this, as I said, the head of architecture was same company, so I already knew the people. But with this, it was really powerful to get the full context of where I was. Talking to people was fantastic. At some point, when I was leaving, because as a consultant, they hired the replacement, one of the developers told me that he really liked the fact that I had a call with him alone, asking these questions and getting his feedback and being serious about that. These kind of things, they give you, they win the respect of people, but also they give you fabulous information. Talking with one developer, when I said things that we need to change and why, was, well, we have the iOS app now, the build is running into some servers in somebody's home. At home with some other guy, not in the cloud, and we have a problem because the guy now is on holidays and the server has issues and we don't know what to do. And I was horrified. Why is this? Nobody was talking about that problem at all. Then I raised the issue. Big companies, you know how things, when they go fast, 1 year later was solved. But this was raised by developer talking to me because I asked him, what do you think we should be doing? Nobody ever asked him this. And then I raised the concern, and that gave visibility to the fact that I was actually listening to people and acting on their concerns. Yeah. Same applies, head of architecture, do the same thing. And even if you are in the same company, if you happen to step in a role in which you have also to work with people that you really don't know, maybe you need to do this with those people, if the company is big enough. Yeah? And then, of course, you need to keep into account another thing, that if you are in the same company, you get promoted, when you go from one role to another, the relationship with your co-workers will change subtly, yeah? Even the jokes and things you say, you have to be careful, even with people you are in the same team before, because what you say will have a different weight. You have to watch your words, yeah? It's not that you have to become a bore and nobody wants to be around you, but you need to know that there will be a different perception on, people will perceive you differently, yeah, because of the different role. Yeah. So when I was put in this role, the expectations they had, they wanted a viable architecture governance framework and devise a viable technology strategy. Now, viable, I added this word. As I said before, these things had to work and accepted. Yeah, so viable for the company in this sense, because he could come up with grand ideas that were not considered interesting by everybody else. They were definitely not viable. Yeah, so these were the main expectations they had in this particular case. There might be more. Yeah. In a particular company, they can give you, tell you other things. The role of head of architecture is not well defined. It's a bit like the role of the CTO. What do you do? Well, it depends on the company. Yeah. So in this case, in my case, when I was gathering context about this, so business goals. So this was an online marketplace in which they ran experiments, as in change some things in the pages or put an offer out there and just make it visible to a percentage of the customers and see if the thing would be accepted or not. Say, wow, this is very successful, let's open up to everybody, or, flopped, remove it, yeah? And with the systems they had, this was kind of difficult for various reasons. And so one thing they needed is, this one of the things that business needed. Of course, this has architectural implication on the system. Reduce cloud running costs. So for all the ones among you that run stuff on the cloud, you may know that sometimes with, especially AWS, things seem to be cheap and fine, then people start using your system because it's successful and your costs skyrocket. Yeah. In this case, there were lots of costs, some of them due to really bad technical decisions, when developers were let make their own choices and try stuff out and add complication there. Yeah. To a point that the costs were high and needed to be cut. Speed up feature development, this is always there. Everybody wants to go faster. Doesn't matter what, they want to go faster. Improve team ownership and autonomy as well. So team ownership and autonomy in this company was a thing, but to the point that they avoided coordinating the teams in their decisions. So you had people doing their best, but pulling different directions, which is not a great idea in general, yeah? And so we wanted to come up with a strategy and a governance that allowed to have still this autonomy and ownership, but somehow put some constraints on it as well. After all, where several teams working on the same system, there have to be rules that apply to everybody, yeah? So we can actually have something that is cohesive. And the system itself, mostly a monolith, so the original thing was a monolith, a PHP monolith, which the teams hated because I think it was personal opinion, mostly because of PHP more than the monolith. Not because PHP is bad, it's just because sometimes developers have their own religion with languages, yeah. I won't mention any other thing about languages in this conference because we know what religion most people are here, yeah. So lots of legacy code. Well, in the mostly monolith and the additional services that have been added to remove the monolith, they still wrote instant legacy in many situations. Undocumented architectural decisions, the kind of stuff you look at the code, say, why did they do this? And then somebody changed that and then blow up in production. Now I know why they did that. Back, yeah. Inadequate operability, so lack of tracing, call tracing and stuff like this. Well, because I said mostly monolith, but because that was the thing from which all the microservices depended upon. Basically, these microservices wouldn't do anything without the original monolith, so it was a bit, a questionable way of extracting things. So, and there was any real consistent tracing. So something happens in the system, where is the error? We don't know. Yeah, there was some of it, but not enough. Patchy test automation, this is always a thing in most systems, and I find this terribly irritating because test automation can actually save your day in more than one occasion, and this is a problem. With this, they ended up in several occasions playing a whack-a-mole game with bugs. Yeah, fix this, oh, now this other one popped up. Fix that, and so on and so forth. Yeah. The teams themselves. So their skills were a bit patchy. So some people were really good, some people not so good, and the goodness in terms of what they knew was unrelated to the particular role. Or said in a different way, there were some juniors that were super good, some seniors that were less good. Yeah? And this was a problem. Unclear code and system ownership, a bit because of the way things evolve in the monolith, but also with these services extracted, there was lots of blurry boundaries there, to the point that teams often conflicted in changing the same parts of the code base in conflicting ways, or ending in a situation that is not my code, is yours, and they'll say, no, it's not mine, it's yours, and this kind of not very useful conversations. Insufficient knowledge of the system itself, because the original authors actually left the company, no much documentation, insufficient knowledge, and many developers go, I don't know, that's part of the system, I don't touch it. I mean, I've been a contractor for quite some time. Any code base I touch it, I don't care. I mean, I write the tests, you can do things. But many developers seem to be afraid of doing that. And then, of course, there is also the other reason that is, if you touch it, it's yours. Yeah? Exactly. So, yay. Not even with a stick. Yeah, so I think the situation is not really specific. It's quite usual kind of scenario. And little coordination among the teams, as I said before. Yeah, this autonomy was to the point that teams decided what to do, their priorities, but then sometimes there were conflicting business priorities, and then there was no way to decide, well, this business priority is higher, so you guys help these other guys. Instead was, no, we cannot help you because we have our own priorities, go away. And this is, as you can imagine, from a business perspective, is quite a big problem. Yeah? The architectural decisions, so themselves, the teams taking them in an uncoordinated manner. So patchy decisions without much consistency. Yeah? Same problem solved differently in different places. Yeah? Architect role performed by senior level engineers that didn't talk too much with each other when taking these decisions, and they had other priorities to attend to. So the reality there was not that they were not talking to each other because they hated each other. It's not that the other priorities to attend to were often more pressing from their point of view. When you have a product owner on your neck, we need this feature, we need this, we need this, what you do is you focus on that, especially if the person has power on your career. Yeah? So the decisions were not taken correctly, and also the kind of patchy skills added up to mistakes and problems. Yeah. And this is the one I like the most, decisions driven by fashion rather than reason. We need to scale to internet scale, we'll put Kafka here, queues there. It's like a lot of asynchronous, we need to go event-driven asynchronous to be scalable. It's like, what are you scaling to start with? You don't know. But then also saying, well, user interaction with this system is an online marketplace, is synchronous. How do you put asynchronous behavior in what is basically a synchronous interaction? Well, you do polling. How are you scaling with this polling to check your messages? Or expectations of messages that would come in a specific order from different systems, so they had to wait and implement all sorts of madness. But this was basically driven by the fact that they wanted to use some technologies. Yeah? Or nowadays, microservices is all event-driven because it's the way forward without really thinking about the implications. Yeah? Again, it's not this place was not special for that. Yeah? Most places are in this way. And so when we were working on the governance and strategy, we decided to, well, somehow, I have to say that these decisions were not totally explicit. We are kind of, this is a rationalization of how they came about. Yeah? Perhaps is, so things like provide guidelines, constraints, and recommendations. Yeah? So basically, this is one thing that we wanted to do. So something not too strict, maybe some guidelines, some things like recommendations. If you want to do this, this is the best way, but you may have some leeway to decide. Constraints, you do this way. That's it, no discussions, yeah? And guidelines, of course, is about how you are going to implement things. Balance centralized and decentralized decision-making. Team autonomy was important, but then, of course, they were working on the same system. There is a need of coordination at some level, yeah? So try to find a way of centralize some decisions, but minimize the number, and still have a good governance framework. Document decisions sensibly, yeah? So the teams, some teams were using ADR, started to use ADR, some other teams were using nothing. So he said, okay, let's do ADRs for this, yeah? Architectural decision records for the ones that, I don't know how many know about ADRs, architectural decision records. Raise your hand. Okay, quite a few. Some don't. So it's basically usually keep them in markdown files, and they have a format that is very similar to a pattern, if you like. You describe this, we have this problem, yeah? To solve this problem, we take this architectural decision, and these are the reasons why we take this specific decision, and then also write the consequences, as in, this decision allows us to achieve this, this, and this, has these negative effects, yeah? Usually decisions have bad consequences as well, but if the decision is a good one, if the good is more than the bad in your context, yeah? And usually the ones for a single service are kept in configuration management along with the service code. This is what they are, very simple stuff. But very useful because you avoid the situation of, you look at the code, is what were they thinking? You go through the records and see, and you may find an explanation for something that looks odd. Yeah, and you avoid wasting time to try to undo something, and then after one day of work, I understand now, and then roll back, roll back, roll back, yeah? We had decisions to document at different levels, so we said for the teams, we suggest keeping them in Git for the decisions regarding a specific service along the code base in Git. Decisions higher level, some of them ended up in Confluence. We had no better place to put them, but what happens is that when they are very high level, they tend to be more stable, yeah? So changing something in Confluence then becomes not too difficult. But when you are at the single service level, they are much more dynamic. And so if you keep them in Confluence, as some things did, it's gonna cause you a lot of work, yeah? Especially if you want to, what was the decision for this version of the server, not the latest? It's, oh God, yeah, okay? So document this in a way that was usable. Adopt or adapt existing processes and tools. As I said before, go on, Thierry. I said there was, so, okay, is there a question or is there? So he said that there was no documentation, absolute no documentation. How did we move forward? So we started documenting decisions. Yeah, it's like, no, it's like start focus on what you are doing now. Start from there. When you touch previous stuff, document that as well somehow, if you can, yeah? So it's basically document what you are gonna touch anyway. What you are not going to touch, you don't care much, yeah? So that's the approach. The adopt or adapt processes and tools, this is what I mentioned before. Don't go there saying, this is all wrong, I'll fix everything. It's much better to fix whatever is not working and maybe accept some compromises. Because this means also that you don't have to change all the interaction patterns and everything, yeah? Automated as much as possible. The example I gave before about, you want a database encrypted at rest, make it easy for teams to have that. And there were the SREs already working on these kind of things for the cloud, and then there were other choices. So there wasn't much, but people were already starting to work on these things, yeah? Agreed with the stakeholders, as I said before. Everybody had to buy into the approach, yeah? Or failure would have been assured. So we ended up this way. So we created a governance team, which was applied, then also apply already available security guidelines. There were plenty of them, mostly ignored. So we said, well, maybe we should stop ignoring them and applying them because they were also good. Decisions pushed as close to the teams as possible. Yeah, so minimize the number of centralized decisions. Some of them will have to be, but push as close to the teams as possible. IDRs, as I said before. There was also a process there already, but was really broken. We fixed it. This was the request for comments when they needed help. So people would go, I have this big problem. I tried stuff out. I have not found a solution. I need help. So to do that, they would write a document describing the problem, describing sometimes what they've tried to solve it. Yeah, it's a kind of a longer version of a Stack Overflow question, if you like. And then asking people, I couldn't figure out how to do things, and can somebody help in the company? Now, we had to fix the process because at some point, people, for some reason, were using the RFCs in place of ADRs, which is a problem in itself. The purpose is different and the format is different. But also, the communication in this company tended to be via using Confluence as a chat system. So RFC page on my screen, I would see Confluence popping up things. There is a new version. There is a new version. There was somebody putting a comment, and then somebody else putting a comment just after. And it's like, okay, you know, guys, you should write this down. You publicize this, let people read this, and then organize a call with the people that are interested in helping and just talk to each other. Don't write all this stuff in Confluence. It's useless. Talk face-to-face, much more efficient. Yeah? So we actually fixed this process. Of course, adopting it properly requires time. Yeah? It's never instantaneous. But we address this, trying to address this kind of interaction issues that they had that were not very useful. Also, written communication like that very quickly ends up in a fight because it's very difficult when you write to be precise, and it might be sometimes you think you are direct and the other guy thinks you are actually criticizing or her. Yeah, so for you what is direct for you, for them is lack of politeness or is aggression. When you are talking, it's much easier to convey the appropriate message. Yeah. And there was a process to contact the architectural governance team, which we formed, and I'll show you briefly. So basically the process was something very complicated. It was, you need architectural help, call us. We have a Slack channel that will monitor, we have emails, you know who we are, just call us and we'll help you. The entire description of the process for asking for help, yeah? And then automate the controls as much as possible. The automation is a recurring thing. Yeah, because if you have to do lots of manual work, it becomes just too much. And so there you go, the architectural governance team that we created. Now, there was a core team with operational duties. That was me and then some principal and staff engineers. They didn't have architects as such, so they had a bunch of principal and staff engineers say, okay, you know what, guys? Nominate you architects, ta-da, and you will be in this team. And operational duties meant day-to-day work to help the teams, coach them, mentor them, answer questions, provide guidelines, this kind of work, yeah? Then there was another part that is the extended, that included the core team, but also the heads of engineering and the VP of engineering, yeah? The VP was responding directly to the CTO. Why these people? These people was to make sure that if we had any decisions to take, the main decision makers were in the room, yeah, to agree on it. Because if it was simply the head of architecture and the architect say, this is an architectural decision, you must do that, why should the team comply to that? I mean, who is this guy, Giovanni, a consultant there? Who cares? It doesn't affect my job. I disagree with him. I ignore him, yeah? Also, we are remote, working from home. I just don't see him either, so it's not a problem. So to make things happen, you really need people that have real decisional power, and this is why we included them. But they had also other jobs to do, so they couldn't be there all the time for the operational duties. Yeah? So any important high-level decisions was with all these people. Yeah? So we had a reasonable certainty that things would happen. Of course, these are just a team, but decisions had to be taken also not ignoring the team. So to talk about stuff, maybe we would call senior engineers or others, you know, from the teams themselves to understand the problems, to work together, yeah? So it's not ignoring people doing the real work. This is more supporting them, making sure that things happen in the way that is supposed to happen, yeah? And for the technology strategy itself, of course, has to be aligned with the business goals. Yeah, whatever you do, whatever you use in technology and however you solve the problem has to solve the problem of the business. Otherwise, you are not doing anything useful. Use technologies approved by the company. This is, as I said before, there are licensing things. There are other issues as well, like hiring. Yeah? So if we decide, in that case, they had PHP, but then the new systems were in Go, that is a decision that affects everything, affects hiring. And affects, it's like, are there enough Go programmers in the countries where we are? Is a real problem. So you need, these technical decisions have a strong effect on the company itself. yeah, on hiring and keeping people and training and all sorts of stuff. The architecture had to be evolutionary, so no, the grand design, this is it, do that, we are done. But so it was more kind of, we go increment, iterate, and change shape as needed. Allow for fixing the system while evolving it. We'll stop 6 months to fix the system, and then we'll start implementing features again, was a no-no. Improve team ownership and autonomy as well, yeah. And compatible with the culture of the company. Yeah, because if you want to go against the grain of the company, you have a problem. Either is the CEO decides to do that, but then this means that potentially you're going to lose lots of people and have new ones, and in that case, that just didn't make any sense whatsoever. So you want to have something that people can accept more easily. Yeah. And so for the technology strategy, in this case was simply how we wanted to migrate from the system we had to a different one. Say, well, technologies, teams could choose Kotlin or Go because these were the technologies they were using. There is, of course, also Swift for the iOS mobile app, but we are talking it's like mobile apps, you have limited choice. Android, so Kotlin, or maybe Java if you want, but it's Kotlin nowadays, and Swift. Backend, you have plenty of choices to say, well, you know what, you stick on Go and Kotlin, and then, of course, for the monolith, there is PHP. Yeah, but anything new, they wanted to use this. Open source libraries and frameworks up with approved license models. So it was not even you have to use this specific framework. These are the licenses that are approved. These are the ones that are not. Yeah? Within this constraint, you choose whatever you think fixes your problems, which is quite a lot of autonomy. Yeah? Of course, if you ask for something that is paid for, often companies are a bit more, yeah, you can choose that, but we need to check if we can, the licenses, how much they cost, and everything else. Service-based architecture. So I call it service-based because I really don't like the microservice term because now it's lost any meaning. People when talk of microservices with tens of thousands of lines of code. Originally, they were supposed to be like a micro. In 1 week, you can write it from scratch, and then you can scrap it if you don't want that. Try to scrap a microservice nowadays. It's like 10,000, 100,000 lines of code. It's very different. So it's more service-based. And it's also a natural evolution about any service-based architecture. You start small, functionality changes, you add things, and so things tend to grow. Yeah, and you probably you don't want to split all the time to make smaller and smaller because that adds other problems. The service-based architecture was also very compatible with the company culture because, as I said, the teams was able, in this way, we could give them clearer boundaries about ownership. Yeah. They wanted to use domain-driven design to define the domains. So here I put also define because an interesting thing is that nobody, I think, really understood the domains they had there. There were always conversations, misunderstandings. So there was a need to actually have conversations to really understand the main domain is kind of intuitively, obviously, in an online marketplace. But then the subdomains, supporting domains implemented by the various teams, that was a bit of a more gray area. But use domain-driven design, so they wanted to do some workshops and things to discuss this. And so we ended up with, so here I put the very simplified version. The long version was maybe 4 pages, A4, something like this, with some also detailed recommendation. Extra services for the monolith, and the main recommendations there, given with, this is just the abstract, encapsulate them within the monolith first, then extract them in autonomous services. Now, the first one, the encapsulate them within the monolith, was a controversial thing there. Because it was interesting. The monolith, you see, every time you read a book about extracting from the monolith, they tell you, do you have this beautiful modular monolith, and now you want to take this module out in a service. Easy. You write the new service, you implement it. At the beginning, maybe you share that part of the database, then you extract that in its own thing, ta-da, you're done. When you have a system that is a legacy system where the boundaries are blurred, trying to write the service first, you are in for a surprise because you really don't know what the domain is to start with. Yeah? So, and actually refactoring the monolith, what you do there is you understand the domain, you define it, you clean up the code for everybody else, for the other services that are not being extracted yet, so you simplify the successive work, So you understand the domain, and then you can extract it more easily. Yeah? A particular team didn't really bind to this because they had their own theories. So they wanted to write the service first because they knew what they were doing, even if they couldn't describe the domain. Interestingly, I know that after I left, they ended up in a pickle because they were unable to do some things. I knew that that was going to happen, but they needed probably to go against the wall at high speed, crash the head and say, God, that was painful. Yeah. Okay. So some of this was controversial. Yeah. None of this was easy, by the way. Yeah. Doing things the right way is always difficult. And then we see later also what one of the problems that you have in this kind of situation. So now I will talk about that later. Now, one important thing that I mentioned also before is that governance strategy don't need to be complicated. You don't want them to be complicated. What I described here is pretty much what we did. Yeah? You can describe things in one A4 page, done. And then maybe if you want the details about the security policies, you may want to look at the security policy when you need that, and that could be more detailed. But the strategy itself, you don't need a lot of pages. Governance, same. And if you need a lot, if you put a lot of information there, people are going to ignore it because they don't have time for that stuff. Yeah? But must not be simplistic or vague. I mean, simplistic here, just to clarify the term, is according to the dictionary, that is oversimplified. It's the kind of simple where you are missing some important aspects of the problem. Yeah, so looks simple, but it's actually too simple. Yeah, or vague. Yeah, let's do this. We go service-based architecture and extract the services from the monolith. This is the strategy. How do we do that? We have a mess here. How do we extract them? How are we supposed to act? In fact, in the strategy, I put there some more detailed steps on how to do that. Even the thing of refactoring within the service, there were more details about how to go for it in that particular context, looking at the code base they had. Not every single thing, because otherwise I would have implemented the thing myself. Yeah? But sufficient details for people to understand how to proceed with some clarity. Yeah? Because vague, you don't need that. Simplistic is really problematic because simplistic means you are missing something truly important. Yeah? And then obstacles. So almost everybody thinks they are an architect. So this is a problem when people basically don't know what they don't know. Yeah, but still have a strong opinion. Okay? Here, patience helps a lot because you have to have lots of conversation. Yeah. Ambiguous support from senior management because they always want to fix things, but then they want to do some other stuff. It's like if you would do this, but then you remove capacity, another thing that I don't really like from feature development. How do you do that? And it's always a bit ambiguous. The choosing the fashionable over the sensible, I mentioned this before, choice of technology based on random blogs on the internet instead of saying, okay, this is what we need. Yeah, and it's simple enough. Team structure is a really sensitive topic, and when you talk architecture, strategy, and things, you'll end up talking about that. And everybody has an opinion on that. Yeah, and unfortunately, everybody that does not know how the team structure and the system structure interact has even a stronger opinion on that. Yeah, so this is always a point of contention. Yeah, where your political skills can be really helpful. And then haste. We spent 10 years creating this mess. We need to fix it in 3 months. If it was that simple, we wouldn't really bother creating good systems to start with. Yeah. If you have a mess created in 10 years, it's probably going to take you maybe 10 years to get out of it completely, but you can still make a lot of progress in much shorter time frame. Yeah. And this, again, is one of those things that you'll end up talking about again and again and again. Yeah. And then we had also, in that particular case, a surprise. because some teams belonging to a different division, the organization actually adopted our strategy. They had similar problems because basically their system was a fork of our system. This is for another story. And said, well, actually that makes sense to us as well. And so they adopted that, contacted me. It was quite an interesting surprise, unexpected. But was also useful because in that case is one of the things that as a head of architecture, what you do if you do that, you expand your sphere of influence, which is always useful. Even if you work in a specific department, if you have friends in others that listen to you, your power increases by a lot. Yeah? I mean, not to be power hungry, it's more about being able to have an impact on the company. Yeah? Which is, after all, what you want to do in that position. So this is the end. I put some takeaways here just to, I'll go through very quickly here. That is all the things we talked about. So takeaways. The role is vaguely defined, so you probably have to define it for your own company. It's a bit like the CTO. Some core duties are broadly the same across all contexts. When you talk about strategy, architectural strategy, governance, and this kind of mentoring and coaching are broadly the same. Some details may change. I know, for example, in a company that is actually quite well known, but I cannot mention, they had a difference between head of architecture and chief architect, where the head of architecture was a kind of more managerial role, and chief architect a bit more technical. Yeah, that was their choice. So in that case, was more about managing the architects themselves, but a lesser impact on strategy, if you like, and governance. Yeah? So it depends on where you are. Technical skills are necessary for credibility, but insufficient. Remember the qualities for success. They are really important. Yeah? The ones we discussed before. Architecture is not only about the best technical solution, it's also about what's acceptable for the stakeholders. You need buy-in. Yeah? Nobody cares about your best solution. Yeah? You are thinking about the Ferrari, but you know what an inferior car like a Porsche might do? Fine. I say that as an Italian, by the way. So but it's like, if it does the job and is acceptable, it's much better. You have higher chances of success. Any changes to the status quo have to be viable or they will fail. Yeah? Prefer evolution over evolution. Whenever possible, involve all stakeholders. Don't ignore the teams. You will have a lot to do with CTOs, CEOs. Talk to the teams. They are the people on the ground. One thing that I say, one of the things that I say that often upset managers greatly is when you talk about software products of any kind, services or things that you ship, there are only two roles that are indispensable, only two. Developers, as in people that write code, that create the system. I'm not even talking about testers here, mind you. Just people write the system, and the customers, people that buy that and use the system. These things have always to be there. If you don't have who creates the system, you don't have a system. If you don't have who buys and uses the system, you may as well do something else. Yeah? Everybody else is optional. Optional does not mean useless. It means if you are there, you better carry some load. And your role is not to harass developers, yeah, to do what the customers say. Your role is to support the developers so they can do a better job and to help the customers understand, well, to understand the customers, their needs, and help developers, but also help the customers understand what is feasible and not feasible. Okay, so your role is there to make the life of developers easier so they can do their job properly and to help the customers somehow get more value out of the system. Yeah? The first time I said this, I was in a conference when there were some managers, other people, they really get, wow, what about this and that, and what about this? So I say, I will give you a proof. Say, okay, people, take your smartphones. And go, whoosh. You must have some free apps in the smartphone. Yeah, well, yeah. Okay, the chances are that that has been created by developer in their own room to scratch their own itch and then put it there public, and it's them. There is no project management, there is no tester, there is nothing. There is a person writing code to scratch an itch and then say, you know what, this could be useful for others, I'll put it there. And they say, well, okay, wow, you may be right. Yeah. Because if we think in this way, you also understand how you want to organize your system to be more effective. Yeah? So the head of architecture, as a head of architecture, if I don't know that, and if I don't act accordingly, I'm a waste of time and space, and expensive as well. The expensive bit is for the company. For me, it's fine because I get the money, but it's a problem. Yeah? And then, I said this again and again, governance and strategy don't need to be complicated. Simple is better, simplistic or vague is not. Thank you. So I think we've got 10 minutes for questions, I think, if you have any.
Yes, thank you, great talk. I had a question. You mentioned that you had at some point, like you told people like this is how you should go for like I think implementing microservices or something, and they just would not listen, and you felt like they had to bang their head against the wall until they agree. Like, does that happen often? That this is the how do you figure out that this is the only way forward? You have to they have to get burnt until they will listen.
Now, what happens in this particular circumstance is that, you know, when I said that the support from senior management is a bit, sometimes they say, yeah, we support you, but then there is a real problem, they don't really know what to do. And they say, well, give these people a chance, yeah? And then I make clear that my discontent, say, look, this is what I think they should be doing. My role here is to provide recommendations, yeah, and guidelines. This recommendation is very strong, it's your call. When they bang their head against the wall, as much as I would like to say, I told you, I never do that because it's stupid and it doesn't bring you anywhere, yeah? What you do is say, okay, let's see what we can do to fix it and help them, yeah? And I say that, I mean, with honesty. So I know that sometimes inside me, I'm a bit nervous, angry, and I think that, but then I stop and think again, they didn't have enough context. You may find this problem in other situations. You see, when people don't write automated tests, a typical pet peeve of mine. What happens is that they may want to do that, they have no idea of how to get started, and they have no idea of the implications of not doing that. Once they are burned, because they say, we don't want to waste time with this, we have to deliver features, okay, do that. And then start playing a game of whack-a-mole with the bugs. At that point, they may be more ready to listen to you. Before they don't see the problem, after they realize, hold on, yeah, this is an issue. But I knew before then simply because I've been around for longer, and I banged my head quite often. So, okay, does this answer the question? There was another one. Yeah.
Sort of a similar question. Dealing with uncooperative people, but generally if you have uncooperative team leaders who tend to not only not do what need to be done, but kind of keeps talking, but then never gets to the point or doing anything at all.
So that is a difficult one, because if this happens again, at some point you need to have a word with the bosses. And say, look, this is happening, not behind the back of these people. What you do is say, look, this is not right. I will be talking to your boss and tell them this, this, and this. Never do that, anything behind the back of people, because otherwise you will lose integrity. And even the people you are talking to about the problem, they will not trust you that much if you do that behind the back, because you may do one day that to them as well. Yeah? So you are clear, say, I disagree, I will, or what they are doing is not right, we have talked again and again about this. If this happens, also my suggestion is also try to keep a record of the conversation somehow, yeah? So if they agree on something, maybe have it on writing after the agreement, and both of you and them say, okay, yeah, this is what we discussed, maybe in an email or somewhere. And so later on, if this drags on, you can have a real conversation maybe with the boss, because some uncooperative people might just be there, maybe you want to get rid of them. Let's put things this way. But also, if you have a conversation, you may discover that there is something else going on. Yeah. So it's a bit complicated here. There isn't a recipe to fix that. But you can always keep a record of conversations, be open about your position and what you're going to do next. Yeah. Ariane.
You mentioned the resistance to changes in team structure. Did you manage to overcome this in some cases, and if so, how?
In some cases, yes. And it's always hard work because it's lots of conversations. You see, with the team structure, now, from a technical perspective, we say there is Conway's law, so we want to match the structure. First of all, it's not only a technical problem, it's also a product problem, because remember that product managers, especially in complex situations, big companies, you have lots of product managers working with the teams. So it's also a product management problem at that point. Yeah? I've got my people with these teams, I don't know how to deal with them now because of the way things are structured. It's quite unnatural to me. Yeah, so you have to come to an agreement with them, yeah, and somehow find a structure that works both ways, yeah, for the technical and product. And then also you have to fight against the people that don't know what they don't know. So nowadays what you see sometimes for team structures, everybody reads the team topologies book. Most of them don't understand it, but they have a strong opinion about things. Yeah? And those situations can be really complicated because the people that think they know stuff and they don't, you have to spend time maybe providing examples, maybe documenting things that you see happening in the company. Yeah, some kind of data gathering, but it's going to cost you time and effort, for sure. Again, unfortunately, I don't have a recipe. Maybe I can say, try what I try to do sometimes. I talk a lot. I try to talk to them to death. And I say, okay, enough. No, but you really have to have long conversations and patience, again. And by the way, the write it down recording, now I've got this guy, I was in the tutorials together yesterday, Ariane, when he said something, and then write it down. That was kind of, now I've got it here. So about the recording things, yeah, this kind of decision, then write them down after agreeing on something, not before. And share, make sure that everybody's on the same page, yeah. There is a question here.
Thank you. Great talk. I have a more fundamental question. So most of the talk starts from the assumption that you're already head of architecture. What happens if there is no position as head of architecture, or if there is no position as architecture? How do you go and influence things around that?
This was actually, there was no, so the VP of engineering decided to want he wanted that of architecture, so the role was not there. I was put in that role and say, okay, let's make it happen. Yeah. If you want to influence that in terms of we don't have that and we want to have one, what you need to understand that is why you need the role. And usually, if you need that role, it's probably because you have people pulling in different directions. There is little coordination. Yeah, teams working on the same system but taking uncoordinated decisions. And so you can use that. Say, look, we need someone, a role, something, a function, yeah, to make sure that we are all on the same page. We do something coherent and pull in the same direction. Yeah. So if you want to influence the creation of the role, as in we don't have one, and we need one, you need to provide the why. Yeah, again, quoting this morning keynote, the why is super important. And you provide the why with data, again. So it's like observation, this is happening, this is what I see in the teams, yeah? Always assume that people are doing their best. So they are trying to solve a problem, it's just that they are not coordinating with each other to solve the problem in a way that is somehow coherent, yeah? Does it answer the question? Okay. Alan?
That's a great story, and I think you can be proud of what you've achieved. But what do you wish you'd known before you started?
Sorry, what?
What do you wish you had known before you started?
What I should have known before I started? I should have asked if they wanted to pay me more. Sometimes you have this doubt. I don't know. I think this is a difficult one to answer because you never know what you should have known. You know, in hindsight, it's kind of, if I had known that they were maybe wavering in some decisions, maybe I could have done something slightly different. I don't know. It's a difficult one. And because also when I start in these situations, I always, well, if it was like in this case an existing customer, I knew enough of the situation. I knew also the strengths and weaknesses of some people. And I discovered new ones, of course, in the new role. When I'm starting with a new customer, I generally ask questions around what they need, so I have an idea. There are always new discoveries, but I can't really tell you what I would have liked to know before that. Probably it's also because many of the problems end up to be mostly the same everywhere you go. So it's kind of, I find it difficult nowadays to be totally surprised by something in a company. Well, and that's not true. It's like if you go to a company and everything is perfect, then I would be totally surprised. Oh, sorry, I don't have a better answer. Any other questions? No? Thank you very much. Enjoy your coffee and the rest of the conference.